And we're live.
It is
Kate?
Tuesday, July 21st, 2020, 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time. We're late because Ben was hanging out in everybody's left ear. And today we have a very interesting kind of new type of episode of In Lieu of Fun. It began when Ben texted me this morning about what we should talk about, and I suggested the recent news story that Trump was deploying domestic surveillance, and it ended with Ben saying, me suggesting a bunch of people, and then Ben saying, I know everything that they know, so I am probably the best person to talk about that. And I said, well, great, then why don't I just interview you? And then there was a nice postscript, which was when Ben decided to put up the notice for the show, and Ben is always kind of in charge of putting up the notices for the things and putting up the links and the pictures for everyone. He put up this incredibly amazing picture of himself, which I'm going to screen share now in case anyone missed it, which is, oh, come on, Ben. Like, literally one of my ex-boyfriends from college came on the show and posted a picture of me in a headdress at Mardi Gras.
I am not complaining. I posted the damn thing. I'm not proud of that picture.
And so here is Ben's picture. This is a young Ben Wittes. I love this picture. This is a young Ben Wittes in front of the Capitol building, looking super chilled out with a nice headband. I have a really big question. What is in your front pocket?
Yeah, so at the age of 18 or whatever I was, I was 18 when that picture was taken. I only ever wore sweatpants, which generally didn't have pockets. And so I kept my ring of keys in the front breast pocket of a t-shirt. And that is that. But you're missing the key feature of this picture. Which is,
the
if
headband?
you look... No.
The hair?
No. Lower. Look at the sweatpants.
Yes, I'm looking at the sweatpants.
If you look at the sweatpants below the level of the thigh...
Okay. Like here?
They are soaking wet.
Oh, like from here down?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're an idiot and you're wearing sweatpants in like DC in the middle of the summer?
No, it wasn't the summer. It was this was spring break of my freshman year.
Did you go in the pool?
I had just emerged from the reflecting pool.
Oh my gosh.
And I climbed out of the reflecting pool. And I sat on that wall. This was back when you could climb in the reflecting pool without getting
arrested.
And I had climbed into the reflecting pool and walked across it. And the fountains were not on yet. So I walked across it and climbed out and heaved myself up onto this wall and gave my friend Steve Vladeck the thumbs up, which you can see he snapped the picture just as I was bringing my hand down. And I was very proud of myself that day.
That's a pretty great story. I am very pleased that you put this picture up. So a few things. One, you're way cooler than me. This is like a very cool photograph. This is like, I do not have such iconic photographs. I don't think most of mine are.
'Cause you're a digital native. Like there aren't actual paper photographs of you.
No, I have tons of paper. I was in college when all of my it was all paper photographs in college, all the way through college.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I actually have, I remember my mom, I remember taking a, I remember it was expensive to get film developed. It was expensive to buy film. And I remember demanding that my mother give me our point and shoot camera so that I could take pictures on our field trip on the Erie Canal. And my mom was like, what the hell do you need? We live right next to the Erie Canal. What do you need to take pictures of? I took like 4 rolls of film of like the Erie Canal. And anyways, not as good as the reflecting pool. It also smells a lot worse, let me tell you. And I didn't go in it. But this is a pretty great photo. On the other hand, you're wearing, I feel like, unless this is like people at the age that this photo looks like it was taken that were still wearing sweatpants were like weird kids when I went to high school.
I I cannot resist that characterization.
Okay.
I was not as Josh Sharfstein, who was on the show yesterday, who knew me back then, will tell you. I only wore sweatpants all through high school and well through college. It is really only in I still to this day never wear jeans. And it's only kind of in my adulthood that I've ever really kind of worn anything other than sweatpants. And in my soul, I am like a guy in a sweatpants and t-shirt. Anyway.
So, anyways,
that is me.
So what you're saying is your entire adolescence prepped you really well for the pandemic.
Yeah, indeed.
So we don't have fun anymore. So in lieu of fun, we have Ben Wittes. Ben, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Kate.
Welcome to
it's
your
good
show.
To be here.
This is going to be fun. Anyways, I do actually kind of really want to talk about this. And I also kind of want to talk about, I feel like they're related. Maybe I'm wrong about this.
Can we get the picture of me off the screen, though?
No, I'm just going to stay up there. This is my prerogative.
Oh. All right. It's up to you.
No, I'm just kidding. I'll take it down. But it is pretty good. But I do want, like, I feel like the news yesterday that you were busy with, I want to first talk about, you mentioned it on the show, as you had a document in your inbox. What was that about? Do you have something in advance of this being national news?
Well, I mean, it was a document that was leaked to me that the story we broke was based on. So, yeah, I mean, I think this policy, it is fair to say, is highly controversial within the intelligence community. And, you know, there are a lot of people in the intelligence community who got into this business not to protect Confederate statues, but to protect the country from, you know, people can agree or disagree with the way the intelligence community does business, but, you know, there are a lot of people who get into this world because they have a very sincere set of beliefs about steps that are necessary and, you know, in order to protect the country against very serious attack. And so when you, and that can be, you know, very serious problems with, say, Russian interference in the election, but sort of high-level national problems, right? Or because they're, you know, China economic nerds and, you know, they're really interested in informing policymakers with good economic analysis of the Chinese, of Chinese behavior, right? Like, there's a lot of reasons people get into the intelligence community. Very few people get into the intelligence community because they have a passion for protecting Confederate monuments. And if I sound contemptuous of that, I plead guilty. I mean, I don't think that is a appropriate deployment of the sort of powers that we have invested in the intelligence community. And so, like, suffice it to say, there are people who are upset. And the fact that I received this document is a reflection of that.
So just to kind of bring everyone in, the document that Ben received was from the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Intelligence and Analysis, and it described personnel as collecting and reporting on various activities in the context of elevated threats targeting monuments, memorials, and statues, and gives legal guidance concerning the expanded intelligence activities necessary to mitigate the significant threat to Homeland Security. So in short, basically, the headline on the story that you and Steve Vladeck wrote basically said that the Department of Homeland Security authorized domestic surveillance in order to protect statues and monuments. So that was actually that happened the day after Steve was on the show? The day, like, or 2 days after. I think it's 2 days after. He was on
so Steve
Saturday.
Steve came on the show Friday, or it was Saturday, to discuss his lawfare piece of Friday, and I asked Steve to work with me on this piece because his knowledge of the relevant domestic authorities is somewhat stronger than mine. And so when I saw this document, it was important to me to have his eyes on it, just because, you know, multiple brains are better than one in just kind of processing a document like this and sort of figuring out how it interacts with other law. And so I asked him to work with me on the story.
So, what exactly has been like? Is this coming? Is this a reaction to Portland, Oregon? Is it a reaction to Black Lives Matter? Is it a reaction to both? Is it one more than the other?
I can give you a earnest answer to that question, or I can give you a cynical answer to that question,
I
and
would
they're
like
quite
both
different.
because I
All
like to
right, so
make my own judgments.
the I mean the earnest answer based on the text of the materials in question is that the president issued an executive order a month ago, in which he uh, instructed the Secretary of Homeland Security to share whatever information was necessary and take active steps to protect monuments and statues. And so this thus designated effectively a Homeland Security priority, and this is a guidance memo to intelligence analysts essentially implementing the president's executive order. That's the earnest answer. Cynical answer is, and I mean, I think the earnest answer is truthful on its terms, but the cynical answer is important too. The cynical answer is the president is running a campaign based on a fear of people crossing the border, b fear of anarchists coming to get your mama in cities, and three, the protection of monuments and statues. They're coming for they whoever they are coming for your Confederate statues, and I'm the guy who's going to protect them. And this is a order that this essentially designates these themes, at least not the border theme, but the other two themes, as effectively Homeland Security priorities, justifying the collection of intelligence against U.S. persons. And so I think the cynical way to understand it, and frankly the way I do understand it, is that it is operational guidance to intelligence professionals to implement the president's campaign themes.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems to me like, yeah, I'm a little. So, is the basic gist of this is that like this that the I mean, to double down, and I don't actually think it's cynical. I will say it's political and it's savvy. It's kind of like talking about the real kind of motivate, like the practical and normative motivations behind this. But like, the president has no real incentive ever, and few presidents have ever had a incentive to protect local and state statues and monuments. Like, this is something that is happening because those monuments are perhaps under threat, but also because the people that want to protect those monuments are people that constitute the president's base.
Agreed. Um, Look, I mean, if you said um, the order does not apply merely to federal property. It applies also to state-owned and privately owned monuments and statues. And so that means if I put a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest in my front yard, and thereby, and I'm using that example intentionally, not to be provocative, but because doing that would rightly provoke my neighbors. And if I, built a big shrine to Nathan Bedford Forrest, and some of my neighbors, on social media sort of contemplated maybe tearing it down or vandalizing it or drawing horns on Nathan Bedford Forrest, under this order, the Department of Homeland Security would be entitled to collect on them. And now that doesn't mean wiretap their phones. That like we could talk about what that means and what that doesn't mean, but that strikes me as an extravagant proposition, and a proposition that is very deeply political. And by the way, taken the wrong side of the political conversation. But for those of us who don't believe that the intelligence community should be political at all, an instruction to the Department of Homeland Security, which, by the way, if you made to the FBI, I don't believe you would be able to get implemented. And you know, there's a reason why this was made to the Department of Homeland Security, and it's very closely related to the reason why the sort of shock troops of the president's agenda, you know, are not U.S. Secret Service. They're not, you know, FBI agents. They're not, right. Who are they? They're the Customs and Border Patrol people. And so, you know, this is like, you know, focusing on the weak links in the intelligence community. And by the way, there are fine people who work, really fine people who work for, you know, DHS's intelligence and analytics unit. They have been denuded of leadership because the president has basically fired everybody at the senior levels. So you have these senior levels that are all acting and are very easily manipulated. And that's a toxic combination, and it's very dangerous.
Yeah, Pontiac Silverado in the chat just said, "Does anyone remember WACO?" Which of course was which is kind of an interesting reference. And I think for a lot of people, like the closest reference maybe of like the federal government sending in like brute force into like kind of like a very local or domestic situation.
Okay, so let's talk about WACO and Ruby Ridge, which she also mentions. WACO, which was a disaster operationally, and it got a lot of people killed. But it was an attempt to execute a perfectly lawful warrant. And it was not the fault of the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms folks who went to execute that warrant that group of people decided to barricade themselves with a very large number of weapons and explosives and children in that compound for, what was it, 50 days or something. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Ruby Ridge, you know, these were not examples of intelligence abuses. These were examples of perfectly lawful law enforcement operations conducted in a fashion that was botched, and in the case of Ruby Ridge led to a standoff. In the case of WACO, actually led to a lot of people getting killed. And I don't want to defend that because I don't think WACO should have been there. You know, the decision at the end of the WACO standoff to go in was a terrible, terrible decision, and it really, I mean, it got a lot of people killed, and they should have been more patient.
By ATF?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the initial decision to execute the warrant and to go in, you know, and to look for
it was very much within its jurisdiction. Yeah.
It was completely appropriate.
Yeah.
And both of those situations involved, frankly, illegal behavior by the individuals in question. And so this is a different situation. We are not talking about law enforcement activity here. We're talking about intelligence gathering. We're talking about intelligence gathering against U.S. citizens. And by the way, I am a defender of appropriate intelligence gathering of against U.S. citizens. I've spent my career largely arguing that the rules on that should be contemplate that. And so I'm not, you know, a fiery civil libertarian on this stuff. I do not believe that local property crime is a basis for intelligence gathering. It's a basis for law enforcement, appropriate law enforcement action. And I have no problem if somebody, you know, vandalizes a courthouse or vandalizes a statue with prosecuting that person. I don't want the government systematically collecting data on that person's friends or associates on that basis.
Here's my question. The exact language used is personnel to assist, like the surveillance of. And so so is it actually, hold on, is it surveillance of? Let me just it's
so the use of the word surveillance is complicated there for reasons that I can explain. Think of it as intelligence collection.
Yeah. Sorry, I just lost my place in the thing. But it was basically the thing that really confused me about the entire gist of this idea was that there was personnel to assist with the protection. It directed the Secretary of Homeland Security to provide personnel to assist with the protection of federal monuments, memorial statues, or property. Assist with the protection of does not sound assist with the surveillance of. And that's part of the thing that I was curious about. The other thing that I was curious about is does this extend to basically if you have probable cause to bug anyone's house, can you start bugging houses that you think might try to attempt to tear down the statue? How does this all work?
Okay, so that's a great question, and let's break it down. So the first question is, do you have the authority to collect pursuant to this mission at all? This is by far the most important question. So if the FBI, so back in the bad old days when the FBI, COINTELPRO, right? The FBI would just say, we're afraid that Kate is a subversive, so we're going to collect on her. And in the period after Watergate and the Church Committee, that was ruled out. And it was ruled out by what are called the Levy guidelines, the Attorney General's guidelines, which say basically it's not enough that you don't like Kate, right? You have to have a predicate of some kind to start investigating at all. It can be a criminal predicate, we have a reasonable basis to think she may be, torturing cats. Or it can be a sort of national security predicate. We think there's a reasonable basis to believe she's, helping the Russians interfere in the election, right? But there has to be an articulable basis before you can start collecting on somebody. And it has to be pursuant to some reasonable understanding of mission and threat. And so for each department and section that does intelligence collection domestically, there's a list of things that they're allowed to collect for, right? So you can't collect because you're interested in whether people are drinking more or less Campari, right? That is not a reasonable basis for collection. So the Department of Homeland Security has a set of articulated missions that it is allowed to collect against. Terrorism, right? If it thinks that there is a terrorist threat emanating from Kate and the circle of people who meet at her house, it can collect on that. That does not answer the question of what techniques it can use, right?
Oh,
that's the question of whether it can collect at all.
Got it.
And so here, what they effectively did was they added protecting statues and monuments to the list of things you can collect, the list of missions that justify collection on U.S. persons. Now, if you're going to conduct, so what does that entitle you to do? In the first instance, it entitles you to collect all sorts of public information. So, for example, all your public social media stuff, which generally speaking, the government's not allowed to, they're not allowed to map your social network, just out of curiosity. Everybody else in the world is, but the government's not. Now, if they reasonably think you're a threat to a statue, they can figure out all the people that you're talking to on social media. It does not entitle them to conduct electronic surveillance. It only entitles them to conduct physical surveillance if they have a counterintelligence interest in you for some reason, which we assume they don't in the protesters. So there's probably not following people going on. But I do think there's probably a lot of social media monitoring is I think where the action is here. And, you can say, well, the Washington Post gets to, follow your social media. Why shouldn't the Department of Homeland Security? But, and, I suppose there are worse things in the world than the government monitoring people's social media. It is a line that we don't generally cross, and we're pretty careful not to cross in the United States. And some of us thought it would be unthinkable to cross that line for something as relatively trivial as preventive protection against local property crimes.
So
That's
yeah.
not the position of the Department of Homeland Security, apparently.
Yeah. So like local property crimes, I mean, at what point interesting question, because at what point do you go from blowing up a building or blowing up a part of a building and doing something like the Weather Underground might have done and blowing up a statue or removing a statue or removing something like that? I think that they're like all of those are quote unquote property crimes in some sense, and they tip over into terrorism because of the scale of like kind of how they take down like whatever it is that they're attacking and kind of the message that they're trying to get across. Does that matter at all?
Yes, it matters very much. So if you're planning to blow up a statue, you are committing a terrorist crime, and they have all the authority they need in the world before this to conduct all kinds of surveillance. Merely, plotting to blow up anything is it implicates terrorism authorities that put you in a whole different category. So because
then you could have
here,
counterintelligence, right? Like then
well,
there
it's not
would be
it's not counterintelligence unless because it's counterterrorism.
Okay,
but like if you're plotting something with a bomb or a firearm, you're in frank criminal territory, right? And so they have the authority, they have all kinds of authority to investigate that. So this is, spying on people based on something that's by definition way below that. It's more like spying on people based on conspiracy to commit vandalism. And it's, and of course, a lot of the people that you end up collecting on, so if you have a legitimate basis under this, let's say I'm posing a genuine threat to the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue down the street, and so you're looking at my social media and who's following me and who's liking the, hey, let's paint horns on the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue, and you notice all of those people may not pose a threat to the statue, right? They may be people who clicked like because they don't like Nathan Bedford Forrest and they don't like Confederate statues. And that's core First Amendment activity. And so the concern is here when you're dealing with protests that if you create a very low bar for entry to surveillance, you end up maybe passively or maybe not so passively surveilling lots of people who in fact are just engaged in First Amendment protected activity.
Sure. So is that to say that like it's not made clear at all by the document that like what can be done to what damage must happen to the statue in order to kind of to trigger any of this level of surveillance?
Actually, it does say, and the what it says is super weird, and I don't have the document in front of me, But what it says is that the threshold is, and this is not an exact
Wait, is this
quote.
the impede the function and purpose
Yes,
of the statute?
it is. And
I
I
saw
have
that
the
too. It was super
right.
weird. Okay, I'm glad we saw the same thing.
It's super weird. It's
What the hell is it?
the
What is the impede the function of the statue? I feel like the horse, like someone's about to get off his horse and walk
horse
away,
and
and
you
that
trip
one
him.
just
You
like,
know,
yeah,
no, I mean, so what it says is it is sufficient to trigger this authority if the damage contemplated is of a type that would impede the function or purpose of the statue, which
So if we if we put up pigeon spikes all over the statue, so that
well, given that pigeons shit all over statues,
that's what I'm saying. It impedes. Well, that's one of their functions. They're a pigeon
So
roost.
I was thinking like it meant that if you paint a mustache on Nathan Bedford Forrest, who of course had who had a lot of facial hair, that could not trigger the surveillance authority because it's true to who he was. He had like facial hair. But if you put horns on him, that suggests he's a devil rather than a noble beast. And so maybe that undermines the communicative purpose of the statute, and therefore they can surveil you.
So in this world, is the function of the statue speech? That's the function of the statue.
Think so.
So if the function of the statue is
certainly
speech, that's a very interesting. The purpose and function of the statue is speech, then that's fascinating, because anything to have to now I'm getting ready for my Supreme Court argument in 3.5 years. That anything that you do to the statue is just counter speech.
Yeah.
Permissible under the First Amendment.
I think it is. I mean, it's a frivolous legal standard that would not survive. The phrase that Charles Black coined, it should be reserved the sovereign prerogative of philosophers' laughter, is what came to mind when I read that. But I think that, it points to the danger of having a standard like this at all, right? I mean, the Department of Homeland Security is there to protect against major threats to the United States. It is not there to protect
Which,
statues.
to be clear, used to be the South. Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, I without getting into that, I will just say that nobody who voted to create the Homeland Security Department was thinking about the protection of statues against protesters. And I don't want to defend vandalism because I don't believe in that, and I don't want to defend people who are doing violence against public property because I don't believe in that. I do think there's lots of crime and lots of activity that I don't believe in that does not justify federal intelligence surveillance. And this is, by the way, bank robbery, right? Like the federal government doesn't engage in preventive surveillance and intelligence collection to prevent, organized crime or bank robbery.
Well, this goes straight back to why this is a political issue and not
exactly.
strictly because there's, as Mike Chase, if he was here, would say, there's a crime a day, and you just decide what you're going to prosecute. So it's like you decide what you're going to focus your intelligence structure on.
But right. Well, the latter point is the president has effectively designated this a collection authority, and people are implementing that, and this is kind of what it looks like when you try to implement that. And so you can say, to go back to the earnest presentation of your original question, which I also think is truthful, the president issued an executive order saying this was a priority for him, and the way our government works is that the agencies of the government try to implement that, and this is what it looks like when you try to implement that.
When you try to implement this, I'm still just not clear how you surveil people who want to fuck with a statue. I just don't get it. Like, how do you
So here's
tether it
what
to the statue? Like, how do you, like, I don't, do you put up cameras on the statue? Like, do you put up bugs around the statue? Like,
it is not clear to me it's clear to me that this authorizes the collection of public record information and social media stuff.
oh, that's,
Uh,
oh, okay. Okay. So you think
it
this
is,
all comes from like social media? Some jerk says,
I
tear
think
them all
this is
down. And like,
I think this
that,
is
like, they
mostly
put
about
them in a,
social media
right.
monitoring. Whether it means you can DHS components are authorized to put cameras around statues, I don't know. It's not clear to me whether that's publicly available information or not. And so, like, I've gone back and forth with a number of people about this, and the exact parameters of what this does and doesn't authorize are a little bit opaque to me, and that suggests to me that they're given the that suggests that they're opaque to everybody outside of a small circle of people at DHS.
Yeah, this is fascinating. So I think that basically there seems to me that there should be, but there probably won't be, but like some level of nexus between some 13-year-old saying Black Lives Matter, tear all the statues down, or something like that, and like, I don't know, someone with actual.
No,
Like,
that's exactly the concern.
no, that's exactly
That
concern. Like,
that
right. That's
but
just like,
but also the concern is, that somebody, to go back to our hypothetical Nathan Bedford Forrest statue, that somebody says Wittes has a Nathan Bedford Forrest statue in his front lawn, and for the record, I do not. Fuck that guy. Let's tear that thing down. And
you should just get a
50
pink
people,
flamingo and put it out there just to fuck with them so they have something to take.
Yeah, exactly. And if we tweeted that, 1,000 people would like it, and another 1,000 people would retweet it. Now, are you allowed to now look at all of their social media posts to see if they're a threat to a statue? And right, so like the question of what this entitles you to do just in the Department of Social Media Monitoring is, and by the way, this is a hard question when you're talking about Al-Qaeda, right? Like what are you and aren't you allowed to monitor regarding people who merely are engaged with, like, this is something that the FBI struggles with all the time. And so the idea that you're going to export this set of problems, which really do involve impinging on people's civil liberties, to something that is presumptively, I don't mean to say it's not a serious issue, but it is presumptively a local criminal offense, or maybe even a federal criminal offense prosecuted, around the country, but it is not an intelligence problem.
Yeah. I mean, that was so strange. So we have a bunch of questions. I'm going to go to the questions.
Okay,
Let's
just
see.
tell me, you can't bring them in yourself.
It's okay.
Right?
I'll just read them.
Okay.
We'll do for reading today because like it'll just make everything easier. So let's see. Tony Cava asks, do the mayor or governor have any option to turn back the feds? Can they threaten ZBP officers with arrest, and how would they affect that? Can they appeal to the AG, and to what effect? Finally, to the courts, how long might that take before the administration back down? Good question.
Yeah, great question. So this is a broader question than the intelligence subject. It's really,
it kind of goes more to
direct.
Saturday's stuff, but yeah, it's
Exactly.
still a good question.
But it's still a good question. And look, I think the answer to it is, if the federal officials are operating properly under federal law, and federal law is more expansive and more permissive than people think it is, the local officials have no authority to interfere with federal officers carrying out federal policy. Just as the governor of Arkansas in Little Rock in the 50s did not have the authority to prevent feds from, protecting people's constitutional rights, right? The same principle, it's not morally the same thing, of course, but the same if the federal government is operating within its authority, then federal law is supreme over state law and trumps state law. Full stop. End of story. That raises the question of whether federal officers are within their authority, and we don't really know the answer to that question. There are a lot of accounts that would seem very hard to justify, and I think we are going to have to wait until get into some litigation to figure out what precisely happened in those circumstances. But if federal officials are exceeding their authority and arresting people illegally, well, that's kidnapping. And Oregon law, has something to say about that subject. And so I think the answer to your question very much depends on incredibly fact-specific questions about what is and is not happening. And, we won't know the answer to that question for a while. Now, the second part of your question is how long are we going to have to wait for litigation to resolve some of these questions? Well, the answer is some of them get resolved really fast. So if you hustle somebody into a car and you don't have a proper basis to arrest that person, and appears to have happened a couple times, those people are getting released real fast. And so, the fact that they are not having charges pressed against them suggests that there may not have been an appropriate basis to arrest them in the first place. The third part is some of those people are going to turn around and sue. And, the ACLU has brought suit. The Oregon Attorney General's office has brought suit. And I suspect that some individual people, if people are really being basically disappeared off the streets into unmarked vehicles by people who won't identify themselves without probable cause, you're going to see some Bivens suits brought. And those will take a long time to resolve, but they're going to be very painful. And so I think the answer to the litigation question is some of it's very fast. It's already happened. Some of it is medium speed, and some of it is very long speed. But there is another factor that is not long term, and this is by far, I think, the most important thing, which is that in Washington, D.C., when this happened a month ago, what turned it around was that thousands of people turned out in the streets in peaceful protests and embarrassed the hell out of Bill Barr and the federal government. And those shock troops, who were also CBP, by the way, or a bunch of them went away, and they were quietly withdrawn. And what happened last night in Portland was basically the same thing. A whole bunch of women, moms, went out and peacefully protested. And I suspect you might see the same thing happen tonight. And I think the political response in the form of those peaceful protests is dramatically more important than anything that will happen in court.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. On a much less serious note, I remember where I first learned the difference, like that there were competing this is when I was really young, competing jurisdictions between federal and local law enforcement, and it was Die Hard.
That is super cool.
when the
FBI shows up,
yes, exactly,
and replaces the embarrassing cops with their own embarrassing operation.
Well, no, but it's not embarrassing. Al Powell is on the scene and has it on lockdown, but his boss is a turd. And then Johnson, Agent Johnson and the other Agent Johnson both show up and take over and screw it all up.
And anyway, by the way, that is probably the most unrealistic thing about that movie, including all the broken glass and all the bodies. The idea that the LAPD is really got the situation in hand. Yes. and the bureau shows up and fucks it up. That's the part that, for those of us who deal with law enforcement matters, that doesn't ring quite right.
Yes.
The LAPD just had this down, and then it
Yes.
was fine until the Bureau showed up.
Yeah. No, it was like but it's a great movie otherwise.
I love that
Okay.
movie.
Yeah, it's so good. So Michael Fromberger asks, on the Lawfare podcast episode, I heard Mr. Vladeck say, paraphrasing, that Congress doesn't have any political interest in addressing the systemic governance issues for the IC. Given that, as citizens, Congress is our only real leverage against the IC, are we, for lack of a better word, hosed? It seems difficult to vote effectively against inaction. Thoughts?
No, I think you're misstating what Steve said, or at least
Your understanding
at,
of it?
my understanding of it was that Steve and Paul Rosenzweig were both making the point that Congress has a deep set of oversight interests here with respect to DHS that it has never resolved who has jurisdiction over competing jurisdictional claims, and the result being is that certain routine oversight over DHS doesn't happen appropriately, and that Congress has no interest in resolving its own jurisdictional maladies and incoherence with respect to oversight of DHS. And I don't think, look, if there is one area of congressional functioning that has always been relatively nonpartisan, it is intelligence oversight, and actually been relatively effective. And there are aspects of that have really fallen apart, particularly in the House. Whether you blame Devin Nunes for it or whether you blame Adam Schiff, that's a matter I have an opinion about. But it is certainly a true fact that collegial relations in the intelligence oversight space in the House have completely fallen apart in the last few years. That said, with intelligence oversight is the part of Congress that functions the best. And I mean, really, really the best. And one of the scary things about what happened in the House over the past few years, again, doesn't matter, whoever you blame, is that has fallen apart. Interestingly, it has not fallen apart in the Senate. And I think both Chairman Burr and Mark Warner deserve a lot of credit for that, a lot of credit for it. And but I think the point that they were making was not about the intelligence oversight system being dysfunctional, but about Congress's oversight system vis-a-vis DHS being dysfunctional. And I agree, and I do think there's a question about, until they resolve that, whether we're going to have persistent DHS kind of problems of this nature that we don't have with some of the other agencies.
We have two more questions. One from Tom McGuckin, also known as Weird Tom. That is his own name for himself, by the way. I did not give that
and
to
sometimes
him.
he's James McGuckin. He's
I
got
know.
so many names.
That's why
it's
he's
great.
so weird. That's why he's so weird, Ben. But one of them, and I think it underscores the weird. I have no idea what he's talking about. It seems like it's a song lyric. It says, "Finish out the line, paranoia strikes deep, into your heart it will creep." So maybe that is a song lyric that is before my time. Or maybe Tom is...
No, he's asking a legitimate question, whether the concern about this is paranoid. Look, I...
No,
not
it's an actual song lyric. John Bordeaux finished it.
I see.
But you can go ahead
okay.
and pontificate. There's another question that he actually has, which is also good, which is how much does this surveillance authority bleed into cleaning out peaceful protests, a la Lafayette Square?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So, and I think the answer to it is a little bit unclear, but not zero. And let me give you a piece of evidence in that regard, which is that when Ken Cuccinelli, who is I don't know what title to use for him because he's sort of unlawfully occupying the position that he is, but he's a senior DHS official, went on television the other day and said that the deployment of the forces in Portland was a function of intelligence that they had received. Now, that is not intelligence that came to them from some, from the CIA, right? Because the CIA doesn't do domestic intelligence. Maybe they got a tip from the FBI, but I think probably what he's referring to is this program or this set of activities that they're monitoring people, and they determined that there was a threat to some building or some statue or monument, and they issued this deployment on the basis of that intelligence. And so I think the now, do I know that? No, and I don't want to claim to know more than I do. Do I think there is an integration of the intelligence that they're receiving with the way they're deciding where to put people and how many people to bring? Yeah, I suspect that's why they're doing it, and that is. So I think you can probably, I wouldn't say you can draw a direct line between the intelligence activities that we were writing about yesterday and the show of force in Portland, but I think they're probably not unconnected.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I've been wondering the same thing. And kind of to wrap that up, I think Zach Bliss's question is very similar. It says, I still haven't seen anything about who exactly was arrested, abducted by the unidentified officers in Portland, which I completely agree with. And this was in some part, Ben, like, I know that some people were like, Kate come down from the clouds or something in the chat when I was saying this, but I was like, how do we even know that? Like we don't know anything about some of these like unidentified vans or people in camos that are taking these people. And so anyways, abducted by the unidentified officers in Portland, it did not appear to be people who were actively committing crimes. What do we think motivated the specific arrests? Was it random, or was there some form of intelligence informing them? How does this memo fit into the scheme of targeting protesters? Not feeling too rapturous today, feel free to read. So I just kind of just to kind of double down on that, it is not that I doubt that the federal government is capable of doing this type of thing. Of course it is. Like, of course I believe that this is, like, especially right now, is capable of doing it. It is that, like, empirically, what bothers me so much about this is, like, you wouldn't even know what jurisdiction to send a habeas petition to. You wouldn't know, like, if there was, like, or if, like, they were being held anywhere that was under federal authority, or if they were still in vans in a warehouse in private space somewhere. Like, you would, and which, to your point, would just be kidnapping. And so, like, I guess I'm kind of just, I agree with Zach. Like, that has, like, that has just kind of still, like, it's been 3 or 4 days since that has been happening. And I am shocked that I haven't heard more.
Yeah, so I think a few things are going on. And I think this point is really important. How many people have been subject to exactly what kind of coercive activity is not clear. And I think we should all be careful about that, because sometimes a very small number of incidents get spun into something, much more grand than it really is. And sometimes they get mischaracterized. And so, to me, the acid test of all of this stuff is there probable cause for the arrests that are being made? And are officers behaving appropriately given the authority that they have? Now, I don't think we're going to know the answer to that in a serious, granular way until we have some litigation, right?
Yeah.
And that's what litigation is good for. That's going to take a while. In the meantime, we're going to have a lot of reporters talking to a lot of people. That's really useful too. It's necessarily a bit anecdotal at first, but it gets to be more like data the longer you do it.
They do also
And
not tend to be super. I mean, habeas is so like a lot. Some of these issues are actually pretty thorny and like kind of seem like they could potentially be rumor based very easily.
some of them are rumor based, some of them are on camera. And
Oh, like
Cuccinelli
yes,
admitted
that
that
federal
there
people
had
are
been
taking them. Yes,
that there had been at least one incident, and he wouldn't say how many there were. So we're not talking about pure vapor here. I think it's fair to say, and I'll risk the wrath of my friends on the left by saying this, that we're probably also not talking about disappearances. And I'm pretty confident of that. And the reason I'm confident of that is that we don't have any families who are missing people. And if you go to countries where people are disappeared off the streets, their families, you know, know that they're missing, right? And so that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that people are getting arrested and either being charged with crimes or being released relatively quickly because there's no crime to charge them with. And so
right.
the question is, I suppose, at one level, are the crimes that people are being charged with legitimate prosecutions? Number two, are the people who are being arrested and then quickly released, were those arrests reasonable, or were they merely coercive, inappropriate behaviors on the part of the officers? And number three, irrespective of the merits of any arrest, should the officers be behaving with the anonymity and that they are? The answer to the last question is easy. Of course not. The answers to the other questions are highly fact dependent.
Yeah, I think that that's. I think that that's a great place to kind of end it. I think that this is all going to be so fact dependent based on the next couple of weeks, like based on the next couple of days. It just seems crazy. I could not believe the videos coming out of Portland yesterday with the mom protest. I thought that they were just absolutely stunning. But as you said, like, there is just this really meta game that I don't know that we've ever seen play out on this scale of protest through litigation, protest through legislative action, protest through op-eds, through journalism, through all different types of coverage, and then protest through protest and riots. And then the effect of the riots and how they are packaged and how the protests are happening being like coming out in media and kind of having their own a second life or like a second meaning of how they're kind of being interpreted. It's just as you said, like, it's more damaging to them to kind of to like tear gas a bunch of moms protesting than it is to, like, you know. And I think that that is just like this kind of meta narrative about the current political climate we're in, but like not just the climate of Trump. I think it's like the modern climate of politics. I think that that would be true for anyone.
So I think that's right. And I also think, look, I don't do predictions as a general matter. I will say, I don't believe this program will survive. I don't believe it'll survive.
You're not talking about in lieu of fun.
No, this program, in lieu of fun, was going to go on.
We're going to go forever.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't believe this intelligence gathering program will survive. I don't believe it'll survive irrespective of who is president. And the reason is that I actually think that that activity like this is unhelpful for the mission of the agencies in question, and I think the last thing the Department of Homeland Security needs for its own legitimacy is to be confronting a whole bunch of women in the streets of Portland, Oregon, or Detroit, Michigan, or
sometimes optics are just optics, yo. Like,
so the president can say whatever he wants about exporting this model, but this model is not going to. I don't believe the law enforcement components of this model is going to do anybody any credit, and I don't believe that the intelligence components of this model are going to do anybody any credit too, and they're going to be embarrassing, and I suspect they will get dropped for that reason. But that's just me, and my predictions have been consistently bad. So
that's why I don't ask you what's going to happen in the presidential election, Ben.
But I am going to ask you. But I am going to ask you a question, Kate.
Uh-oh. Yes.
Until tomorrow.
No, you have to. Oh no, I do have to do it still, don't I?
Oh, maybe not.
Guest.
Maybe I do it
because
it's like role reversal today. I'm the guest.
Yeah. No, I'll do it.
All right, you're in charge. We do it.
So
any
hold
way
on.
you
I
want
want to talk about who do we have for tomorrow, Ben?
I don't think we know.
No, it's Ross.
We
Trudeau.
have. We have Ross Trudeau. Yes, and maybe so. Ross
Who's going
Trudeau,
to do what? He's going to do what?
He is going to design a crossword puzzle with us, and maybe if we are very lucky, we will also have another person who designs crossword puzzles. Only he did it from prison.
Well, after robbing banks. Speaking of robbing banks.
Speaking of crimes, yeah.
Speaking of crimes. So that'll be fun. We don't have anyone for Thursday, but we seem to have a lot of chatter about the mom protest in Portland. People have a lot of thoughts, so maybe we could find someone to talk about that.
Find a Portland mom. And we've got a guest for Friday.
And we have a guest for Friday.
Who is somebody I have never met in my life, but is a woman who lives in Christchurch, New Zealand. And she's going to get up super early in the morning because it is in lieu of fun. It'll be 6 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning.
And because she's a Kiwi, she'll be drinking. Just kidding. Sorry.
And she is somebody I met on Twitter and is super knowledgeable about all kinds of things and interesting. And I asked her to come on to talk about the Kiwi response to COVID and why it has been so successful and how they did it. And so I'm excited to have her. And I realize only in talking about her that I don't know her last name. Her name, her Twitter ID, she goes by Callie, and I assume her name is Callie, but I suppose I should find out her name before formally announcing her.
We've got 3 days, which is 10 years in lieu of fun time.
In lieu of fun time.
In the meantime, Ben, what do we say?
We don't have fun anymore.
It's not easy,
but
is it?
In lieu of fun, you can spy on your neighbors if they pose a threat to a statue or a monument.
That sounds great. Have a good one, Ben.
See you tomorrow.